Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's Learn at Lunch webinar. We will hear from Dr. Rodney Holcomb as he discusses small meat processing in Oklahoma. If you have questions during the presentation, please ask them through the chat window, and Dr. Holcomb will answer them at the end of his presentation. You may click the chat button at the bottom of the screen to open the chat window. Additional farm management resources may be found on the eFarm Management page, and I will share the link to this page in the chat window. Dr. Holcomb, I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you very much, Brent. I will pull up the PowerPoint presentation and we'll get things kicked off. Okay. Does everyone see the presentation? I hope. Okay. Unless Brent tells me otherwise, we'll assume everything's in gear.
It's good to go.
All right, good. Okay, I want to talk to you a little bit today about what's happening in meat processing. It's been a big deal for the ag sector in the last year and a half. Really, for a lot of people, it started a year and a half ago. For most people in the meat industry, or those that are trying to do local processing of their meat products, this has been an issue for the better part of a decade, possibly longer. We want to talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening with the meat industry itself. There seems to be a lot of, I don't really want to call it knee-jerk reaction, but in a way it kind of is. There's been a little bit of knee-jerk reaction because of COVID. We need to have more meat processors. We need to have more meat processing capability and capacity in the state of Oklahoma. And I'm not saying we don't, but we do need to take a careful and measured analytical view at what we have, what we did have, what we should have, and what we want to avoid when it comes to meat processing as we go down the road. So I want to talk a little bit about where we're at, where we've been, and where we're going, and some of the issues that impact what we can and cannot do from a technical and an economic feasibility standpoint in the state of Oklahoma. Now, if you're like me, you probably saw this 100 times in the past year on social media. There's not a meat shortage. It's just the big meat processing plants are closed. So here's what you do. Team up with a few friends, contact a local farmer and ask to buy a steer, have the farmer deliver the steer to the local butcher. The butcher will call you when the meat's ready. You pick up the meat, you pay the farmer, and you pay the butcher. And you keep the local small businesses and farms going, and you end up with better meat. For the most part, that is true. This is the custom exempt gray area or loophole, if you will, that allows a rancher to sell meat without really selling meat. The rancher is selling the animal, and the person who buys the animal is having it custom processed at a local butcher shop, and then they pick up that meat. You cannot sell it, but that's how it works. It does keep local small businesses and farms going. It does provide some revenue. Whether you end up with better meat, everybody claims they have better meat, and you will claim you have better meat if you raise your animals and process them yourselves. Whether you do or not, that's up for debate. Like most things related to food, the level of quality really is up for debate. But this is the deal. Everybody saw it on the internet, so it must be true. And it sounds good. And traditionally, this is kind of how things work. Unfortunately, that little small processor where you're going to take this steer that you just bought from a farmer, that processor already had 3 to 6, maybe even longer months of lag time before COVID came along. So if you want to get that animal killed, you better buy it 3 to 6 months in advance and call, well, not buy the animal, but you better call at least 3 to 6 months in advance and book the slaughter date, because that plant was already running at full capacity, probably 110% capacity. So that is an issue. So when we start talking about what is real and what is perception in the meat industry, there are a few things that we ought to just hit right on off the bat. I like this quote here at the beginning. This is Dr. Aaron, works with Rabble Research and Rabobank. And this was in part of a presentation made to Congress back during the summer, where he's trying to explain what's going on in the meat industry. And everybody is concerned about, are we going to run into meat shortages because of COVID and not being able to get people in the packing plants? And I like this. I like this quote. He says, "First, cattle are not beef." And I tell this people all the time. We almost do a disservice by saying that cattle producers are beef producers, because the consumer doesn't go into the grocery store or a restaurant and order an Angus steer. They order a steak, they order ground beef, they order a brisket, whatever it may be. Cattle are cattle, and they're sold by the head. Beef is one of 200 or more products derived from a cattle carcass. So cattle are one of several inputs in a beef production. And he goes on and lists all the inputs that are in the beef production process. And the best part of it is this part. He says, these inputs are always seeking but never finding the perfect balance between one another. And I want you to think about that and remember it, because we're going to come back in a minute and talk about what has happened in Oklahoma in the last 40 plus years. And you'll get a better idea of why these inputs are always seeking but never finding that perfect balance. Now, we'd gone through a spell where per capita meat and poultry consumption had dropped. We'd gone from about 220 pounds per capita per year and dropped down to about 200. So we had lost about 20 pounds of per capita meat and poultry production or consumption in about an 8-year span, going back to the Great Recession and going to about 2014. We dropped a lot, 20 pounds per capita. But we've spent the last 6 or 7 years gaining all that back and a little more. So we dropped 20 over a 7-year span. We went back up 25. So gained 25 back. So a net 5 gain in the last 7 years or so. That's a big change. That's huge when you look at per capita consumption and nationally what's happening with the industry. That is a huge change. There's a huge demand in meat and poultry that has put some strains on already at full capacity processing facilities. Now, Oklahoma small plants, like we said, they were booked well before COVID ever came. Local food demand had been a big push for that, starting back at the beginning of the 21st century. But a lot of people are selling story meat. And when we say story meat, what we mean is you're not just buying the beef, you're buying the story that goes with it. It may be the genetics of the animals. It may be the characteristics of the ranch where those animals were raised. Or it may be some verification process, all natural, organic, whatever the case may be. So that's a reality. There already was a backlog for the local meat long before COVID came along. And I know a lot of people don't like to think of this. Big is bad. That tends to be kind of the mantra in ag. And it's really a disservice to say that everything big is bad, but there does seem to be that connotation in a lot of things that we see these days. But I got to tell you, as an economist, economies of size and scale are real, and they do exist in the meat industry. And the best way I try to describe it to somebody is like if you're a gardener. All right, we'll step away from meat for a second. If you're just a gardener and you've got a small garden around your house, you may work up that garden with a shovel and a hoe and a rake to prep it for what you're going to plant. Now you get bigger, then you may decide it's time to invest in a tiller. Once you get to a quarter acre, half acre, a 1 acre, you're probably seeing that tiller, that's just not going to work. You're going to spend forever running that tiller. So you go to a tractor. By the time you get to 10 or 100 acres, better be a big tractor, maybe multiple tractors. So when you start talking about meat processing, economies of size and scale do exist. The big packers are where they are because many years ago, 50 years ago or so, in double digit interest rate time periods, people with a lot of cash came into areas such as Southwest Kansas, Texas Panhandle, where land was cheap, where they could get water permits, where no neighbors were going to complain about the smell, and where they could put a bunch of cattle in feedlots and feed them out on corn. They came in and built a system and devised a bunch of technology that allowed them to be a much more automated meat processing system. And it makes a huge difference on the returns per animal compared to a small plant. So we hear a lot about packer concentration. Oh, it's so concentrated. Well, that's true. It has been. But the trend that got that concentration up to 80%, that happened back in the 70s and 80s. So we've been at 80%, between 80 and 85% four firm concentration rate for most people's lifetimes, uh, especially if you're under 40, for a big part of your lifetime. We've been that concentrated in the meat industry. So seeing some price swings now, it's not all tied back to concentration, and it's there are various factors that come in and impact what happens with the price of beef. So market swings occur, and everybody makes money and everybody loses money at some point. A few years ago, when ranchers were seeing record high prices in cattle, your big packing plants were losing money. They just had deep enough pockets where they could afford to do that for a year or two, and then turn back around and start making money now. So it is a challenge. You can't blame it all on concentration, although concentration does play a role. You can't blame it all on market disruptions, because we had this drastically growing demand. So there are a lot of realities in the meat processing industry. Now, before we go any further, I just want to back up for a second and just try to explain, if we have some folks that are participating today that don't understand the different types of meat processing that are available to you in terms of slaughter. So in Oklahoma, we've got 4 different types of meat slaughter facilities. There's custom exempt, and that goes back to that little meme that we showed at the very beginning that you saw on social media a lot in the last year and a half or so. That's custom exempt. Basically, you own the animal going in, it's your meat coming out, and it's not for sale. Now, the custom gray area loophole is where the rancher sells you the animal, but you never take possession of the animal. The rancher just drops it off the packing plant for you. That's still part of the custom exempt model. You basically own the animal, so you own the meat, but it's not slaughtered or processed under inspection. So you can't turn around and sell it in a grocery store or in a restaurant. Now, a state inspected facility, that one that's inspected through the State Department of Agriculture, Food and Forestry's Food Safety Division, that one is one that is, in every state that has a state meat inspection system, your inspection system has to be equal to or better than the USDA inspection standards. So meat that is animals that are slaughtered and further processed under state inspection, that meat can be sold in any retail establishment or food service establishment. So any store or any restaurant in the state of Oklahoma, not across state lines, not yet. That was a promise that was made, going back to the late 90s. There was a promise, we're going to revise this system and get away from that so you could sell across state lines. And yet here we are. That was when I first came to OSU in 1997. And yet here we are. That hadn't happened yet. Then there's federal inspection. So that's USDA's Food Safety Inspection Service. Most of the meat you're going to see in the grocery stores where you go shopping has come from a USDA inspected facility, and it'll have an inspection stamp on it that gives you the establishment number. Those animals and the meat coming from those animals, that meat can be sold anywhere in the US. And if you check the right boxes and fill out the right paperwork, you can export that meat as well. There's also something called the TA plants. That's a result of the Talmadge-Aiken Act. And it's basically those slaughter plants have a USDA plant number. So they've got the same USDA stamp seal with their number on it. But their inspector is not an employee of USDA. Their inspector is an ODAF inspector. So it's a partnership arrangement between the state and federals. And that meat can be sold anywhere in the country as well. There are some mobile slaughter facilities in the state, but even the mobile slaughter must fit into one of these categories. Most of them are the custom exempt, but they all have to fit into one of these categories. They're not just a separate type of meat slaughter business. There's also retail exempt. Those are the ones that are not doing any slaughter. They're making a lot of products, whether they're fresh or further processed, from inspected meat that came from a state, federal, or TA plant. And then that can be sold to consumers, but they're not doing the slaughter themselves. So just kind of give you a better idea of what we're talking about when we say custom, state, federal, TA, or retail exempt. Now, there's an old song from 1973 by Dr. John, said, "I've been in the right place, but it must have been the wrong time." This goes back to that comment from the Rabobank financial analyst who said, all these inputs in meat processing are constantly seeking but never finding that perfect balance. Oklahoma is the absolute perfect example of how we just can't get everything to come together in the right place at the right time. So Oklahoma State University had done some studies on small meat processing plants in 1983, and we replicated that 21 years ago in the year 2000. So between 83 and 2000, we saw a 30% decline in the number of Oklahoma meat processors. That's all kinds, custom, state, federal, TA plants, and even the retail exempt. 30% just closed their doors. Now, not saying anything about big, small, did they get bought out, anything like that. Just a bunch of those establishments closed their doors. There are a lot of reasons why that happened. Some of it was related to the onset of HACCP, which is hazard analysis and critical control points. That was a USDA Food Safety Inspection Service thing that came in to play. It was part of a big food safety protocol. And USDA and the Secretary of Ag at the time had said, we're going to require everybody that is not custom exempt to have a HACCP plan. You have to have HACCP compliance. You have to follow these new rules. Your facility has to run in a certain way. You have to have a HACCP specialist who keeps all the paperwork. And basically, it's looking at your plant, and everywhere a food safety problem could pop up, you say, I've identified the area, I'm tracking it to make sure I don't have a problem, and I'm keeping records to show that I don't have a problem. And if I do have a problem, I have a response plan for that as well. So a lot of plants said, it's too much trouble. We don't meet the new guidelines for what we have to do for our facilities. It's more trouble than it's worth. We're going to close our doors, or we're going to go straight to custom exempt slaughter. So we could be exempt from having to follow all these rules. That happened. High cost of renovations and upgrades. Like I said, in the 70s and 80s, there were a lot of people that came into the Midwest and built some of these really, really big meat processing plants. They were the first ones to grab onto technology. But we started seeing that move into some of the mid-size and even smaller plants. And some of the plants said, oh, I would love to be able to upgrade so I can keep up with the Joneses and financially, so I can still be profitable. But it was very expensive. At the same time, you had, just like with farming, you have generational transfer issues. Some of these plants have been operating for decades. And the owners and operators were ready to hand it on to the next generation. The next generation was saying they didn't want it. We're in the tech world now. They were looking for something else to do, something where they could make more money, or they just didn't have an interest in going back and running the family meat processing plant. The commodity industry had become very stiff competition at that point. And then as now, it is hard to find good labor. And I hate to say this, but everything that we look for in the oil and gas industry, and we know every time oil prices go up, it means a big boom for Oklahoma's economy. It kills meat processing, because all these people that are working in the meat processing area, they're hard workers, they're dedicated, they're used to some longer hours, but they can make a heck of a lot more money working in oil and gas. So every time we see an oil and gas boom, it hurts the meat processing industry because people leave it and they go take jobs elsewhere. Now you step into the 21st century, after all this decline that we experienced, you step in the 21st century and all of a sudden there is a huge push for more locally grown, which goes against everything that's just happened over the last 20 years of the 20th century. Here we are in the 21st century saying we're going to push know your farmer, know your food. We're going to promote local food hubs, and we're going to talk about food miles as a concept, whether it makes any real sense or not. We're going to talk about consumers who are comfortable enough and have a strong enough food supply that they can stop focusing on the what, and we're going to focus more on the how. So I have enough food to eat. Now I'm going to get picky about how that food got to my plate. So we've seen all these labels pop up in the last 20 years, and a lot more emphasis given to them. All natural, organic, hormone or antibiotics free. Think of Laura's lean beef and the stir that caused in the beef industry when it came up. Environmental sustainability is a big issue. And in fact, I'm not sure if you still can, but within the last 10, 15 years, you could find certified wolf-friendly meat, beef mainly, but the concept being in areas of the Western U.S. where wolf reintegration or reintroduction programs were taking place, ranchers could sign up to be certified as ranches that had predator control practices that were wolf-friendly. So any consumer that loves wolves and didn't want to see a wolf get hurt, but still wanted that beef from those Western U.S. ranches, then you could find search out and find wolf-friendly label. It was going for a premium in California. So all of this was happening. After we watched our industry decline, we're seeing a big growth in demand. As a result of what we've seen in demand, and really with the final push from COVID, we've had a lot of programs created that are designed to support new and expanded meat processing. Governor Stitt and Secretary Blaine Arthur from Department of Ag, Food and Forestry set aside $10 million from CARES Act funding for Oklahoma. And we had 40 Oklahoma meat processors in September of 2020 that were awarded some share of that $10 million. There were 195 of them that applied. There were 40 that were offered the money. And one of them at the last minute said, you know what, I'm not going to do it. So 39 actually got the $10 million. So we had new plants that were on the drawing boards. They got some funding to be built. We had some that people had already started to build, and they got some of that $10 million to help them finish out the facilities. We had existing plants that were planning expansions, and this allowed them to do that. We had some that were even looking at adding retail shops or making the change to go from custom exempt to state or federal inspection. So their meat products could be sold at the retail level or in restaurants. And that was the big emphasis for the ODAF CARES Act targeted funds, is to make sure that that meat is making its way into the marketplace. In addition to that, we had from the CARES Act, there were some Native American tribes that got funds to build some facilities as well. Now, a few years ago, the Quapaw tribe built a USDA inspected facility right up in the far northeast corner of the state, just right outside of Miami. And they slaughter cattle, they do bison, they'll do hogs, and it's almost like a training facility as well, because they designed it with a lot of extra space and designed it in a way that that you could actually do some training with people. We had folks from OSU, NEO, Missouri State, Arkansas, a bunch of others. They brought them all to the table and said, our facility is here to be used if you want to run some meat cutting programs, which we have not done. But in addition to those, we've had some other plants that popped up as well. So the Osage tribe built one just north of Hominy, very nice plant, been through that one. Cherokee tribe is in the process of finding a plant manager right now for the one they built. The Muskogee tribe has a facility as well. There's talks on and off again about the Choctaw tribe building one. Just yesterday, I heard that that's on, that it's actually in process. The Cheyenne Arapaho tribe has looked at building a facility. So a lot of opportunities for additional meat processing capacity in the state of Oklahoma that have popped up from that. On top of that, there's the meat and poultry inspection readiness grants that are designed to help some of these small plants that are custom exempt jump up to federal inspection. USDA's Ag Marketing Services and Rural Development Divisions have all sorts of loans and grants, and they have made sure that some of those funds are targeted towards more meat processing. The ARPA Build Back Better initiative funds, USDA announced we've got 500 million of that. We're going to put that towards expanded meat and poultry processing. And their argument is we're doing this for competitive purposes. We hear a lot about it, too many big packers, so we want to make sure there's more small processors out there as well. Oklahoma has benefited from this. We've seen this increase in processing facilities. Dr. Terry Hartage of ODAF's Food Safety Division, as you see in this little quote here, says it appears the state will eventually have approximately 14 new inspected plants and 20 new custom plants, including a few that closed within the last 2 years and have been recently reopened. So if I go through the numbers that they have now, and it's changing because we've got a couple more that are coming online, but there are about 60 custom exempt plants operating in the state right now. They're custom exempt, but they're still they don't have a state or federal inspector there, but they're still licensed for food safety concerns. They still have a licensing process they go through, and they're still checked upon just for general cleanliness of the facilities. So there's about 60 of those, 20 state inspected, and that number will change as well. When you look at federal and TA plants, there's 10 of them, and that includes the OSU Food and Ag Product Center, where I'm sitting right now. Right above me is a federally inspected meat slaughter and further processing facility. But Panhandle State as well. Seaboard falls into that number. Of course, they're doing nothing but Seaboard's hog operations out there in Guyman. But the Quapaw and Osage plants are also federal inspected plants as well. As I mentioned, Cherokee and Muskogee tribes are coming on. Choctaw tribe probably, Cheyenne Arapaho, not sure about. There's some others that could come online as well if they pull the trigger and actually end up building them. Those plants, and as a result of the funding they got through the Native American CARES Act funds, they're supposed to be primarily and first and foremost focused on tribal food needs as part of a food sovereignty program. But they can still operate. If they're inspected facilities, there's nothing that says they can't do all the slaughter and further processing for others. So they're looking for contracts to keep their workers working full time and generate a lot of product that's out there for retail sale. We have currently 9 registered mobile farm slaughter trucks and a few more that have tossed around the idea, but it's not cheap to do that. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. If you're looking at where the dispersion is of custom slaughter plants, over quite a bit of the state, they tend to be closer to where the population areas are, which is why you see fewer of them in far western Oklahoma. And you see many of them that are kind of dispersed along the major interstates. For the state inspected plants, definitely much more along I-35, I-40, and I-44. Although you get into northeast Oklahoma, we have a few of them that are spread around just because they're all around that Tulsa growing metroplex. For the federally inspected and TA plants, like I said, we just got a few of them, and except for the Osage plant up here at Hominy and the Food and Ag Product Center here in Stillwater, most of them tend to be on major thoroughfares, except for Panhandle State and Seaboard out here at Guyman. But I-35, I-40, and I-44 tend to be the areas where they tend to be located. Just ease of access. That product can go anywhere, so you have it near the transportation routes. So when I throw them all together, this is what it looks like in terms of slaughter plants. Now, this is not further processing plants. These are not those retail exempt plants. Because if I was going to add those in, I would have all the advanced Pierre plants up around Enid. I would have Lopez Foods that makes all the hamburger and sausage patties for McDonald's outside of Oklahoma City. So there'd be a lot more that we would add in. Osteen Meats, Cusack Meats, a bunch of these other that we see in Oklahoma City metropolitan area. They would come in here as well. But these are just the slaughter plants. So we do have some slaughter capacity. We just have a big enough demand that they're still running months behind. Now, some of the issues that impact our slaughter plants of today is cost. Cost is a huge deal. If you decided you were going to build or add on to your house during the pandemic, you got a pretty good idea of what happened to lumber prices. Well, lumber prices have come back down some. Steel prices have not. Partly because we still have a lot of issues at the ports on the coast, especially the West Coast, that have limited the amount of steel that we bring in. And we bring in a lot of steel from other countries. As a result, I know September 2020 to September 2021, steel imports coming through the Port of Houston were up by 445%. Because if you can't get it in on the West Coast, rather than leave your whole crew sitting out enjoying a month off the coast of California, you send them down through the Panama Canal and bring them up through the Gulf. So the cost of steel is still extremely high. NMPAN stands for the Niche Meat Processors Assistance Network. It's kind of an e-extension program operated or kind of overseen by Oregon State University. And Rebecca Thistlethwaite, who is the director of that program, did a survey of small processors back in 2020. And so we had a lot of plants that were looking then about expanding. And those that were or building new plants, they were saying it's $450 a square foot to build those small plants. I know it's much higher than that now. It's probably easily $600 a square foot. But remember, we're talking about cold storage facilities. You don't just put a big freezer on a concrete slab because the slab will crack. Too much difference in temperature below the slab and above it. So you've got to have ventilated slabs. You've got to have insulated walls. You've got to have refrigeration systems. So just to build the facility, that's not even put the equipment in the facility. Just to build the facility, you're probably looking at closer to 600, depending on what part of the country you're in, maybe $700 a square foot. Even at $450 a square foot, that 5,000 square foot small meat plant like we see as the average size in Oklahoma, that's over $2 million. So that's a lot. plus you throw in the cost of land and the movable equipment, which is all stainless steel. And if steel prices are high, stainless steel prices are dang high. Throw on the top of that you probably need 2 or 3 years of working capital on hand. It's an expensive undertaking to build a plant. And a lot of people say, well, that's fine. I'll just go mobile. Well, if I want to go out and buy a ready-built turnkey mobile processing facility right now, that's easily $250,000, and that's for the base model. It'd be a lot more than that if I want to get something that was really fancy. But even then, I still need access to fixed facilities. Think of beef carcasses. I'm not slaughtering the animal and breaking it down and packaging that day. Most people want their beef aged a little bit, and it is better that way. But I don't have enough space on this trailer to keep a bunch of carcasses swinging around as I drive down the road. So generally, you're going to go back to a fixed facility where you're going to have your band saws, your vacuum packaging equipment, everything that you need to break that carcass down, package that meat, and store it until it's ready to be picked up or ready to be delivered. So the mobile units, they tend to be inefficient. They have their benefits, and if your clientele are willing to pay for it, it's a great thing. If you've got a herd of buffalo and you don't want to try to get them in a trailer and get them to a packing plant, then this is probably the way to go. But they're not as efficient as a fixed facility. You have high insurance costs. I'm going to have a commercial driver for something this big and this heavy on the road, and that's not going to be a meat cutter. That's just the driver. And I still need access to potable water and electricity no matter where I go. Also, one of the issues is what constitutes enough. I mean, we have all these new plants that are coming online right now. At some point, we have to stop and think, do we really need another one? If you reach the point where you look out your front door and you're looking at the back door of your competitor who's 2 blocks down the road, you might have shoved too many small meat plants in the same area. If any of you were trying to get cattle booked for slaughter in the last year and you found out it was going to take a year or so to get that animal in, I know it's a crazy concept to think of, I've got to book the slaughter date for the steer before the steer is even born. That's problematic. But what we're seeing recently, and this was just a few weeks ago, Dr. Hardage sent this in an email. He said, unfortunately, many of the establishments are seeing a very high no-show or cancellation rate up to 30% some weeks due to the bookings being so far out, multiple bookings made for the same animals, change of plans and market conditions, folks going back to work, availability of meat again for large packers, etc. So in other words, you had a lot of people that wanted to get their steer slaughtered, and just to make sure they could get them in, they booked dates at multiple plants for the exact same animal. And now we're starting to see a lot of cancellations. So a lot of these small plants that thought they're booked, they got plenty of business set up for the next year, they're finding out that in a given week, maybe 30% of the animals they're going to kill are no-shows. That's a problem. That tells you you don't want to have too much of a knee-jerk reaction and build too many small plants, because we're starting to see some normalization. The pendulum is swinging back more to more of a normal load. The Niche Meat Processors Assistance Network survey also suggests demand's returning to the pre-pandemic spending habits. Yeah, people still want the local meat, but they're going back to eating out more. And a lot of people figured out when they go in and find out what the processing costs are to get that locally sourced meat and to buy that local steer and take it to the local butcher, it's pretty darned expensive. So some of them have no problem going back to the mainline distributors where they were getting meat to begin with. So the small plants have also said at this point, we've done all we're going to do, and we'll take advantage of any money somebody will give us to expand, but we're not going to take on more debt to expand if we don't think the demand can be sustained. The number one issue with small plants, number one issue with large plants, number one issue with any plant is labor right now. Everybody's concerned about it. You cannot find enough labor. Now, part of the problem is we lost a lot of our meat training programs. Back in the 80s and 90s, we started seeing the small plants start to disappear just because they weren't as efficient. Consumers were wanting a high quality product and something that was uniform. And there were a lot of job opportunities for folks that would have otherwise worked in a meat plant. They could go somewhere else and make more money. We lost a lot of meat training programs, a lot of cutter training programs. I was in Washington, D.C. last week and had a congressman say, well, there's a lot of sous chefs that are out there, the second in command chefs. They're not the top dog chef. They're the next in line. They're the assistants. And these assistant chefs, maybe they would like to go be meat cutters instead of be somebody's chef assistant. That's a pretty big assumption. And just because you know how to slice up julienne tomatoes doesn't mean that you understand how to break down a beef carcass. Totally different process. I don't care how familiar you are with a knife. Doesn't work that way. Now, in a big plant, I can hire somebody. And right now, you can go to any big meat processing plant in the country and start at a minimum of $20 an hour. Some of the ones we have out here in the Texas Panhandle and Southwest Kansas, $25 an hour start, untrained, unskilled labor. If all you're doing is showing up and shoveling junk off the floor, you can make 20 bucks an hour. So they're bringing these people in and they'll say, okay, I'm putting you next to this one person. And this is all they're doing today. They're cutting out rounds, or they're slicing briskets, or whatever one thing they may be doing. Just do what they do. Now, if you do that all day for a couple of days, all of a sudden you get pretty good at doing this one cut off one carcass. And they're willing to pay you 20, 25 bucks an hour because they're getting something for their labor. A small plant, you need to bring somebody in that knows how to break down a whole carcass. And the training process for that is hard, and it's tough. I remember when the Quapaw plant opened, I saw the first 3 steers that they slaughtered in that plant, and it was rough. They had untrained labor, some folks that said, yeah, just give us some on-the-job training, we'll figure it out. You'd swear a mountain lion had mauled those steers to death. It was ugly. It was not pretty at all. But you get better over time, but a small plant can't afford to have people messing up for weeks before they really get it down. So you've seen a lot of people that have said, yeah, I want to do this, but they also have a lot of high paying options. And for small plants, you can't afford to pay 25 bucks an hour for unskilled labor. You need somebody that knows what they're doing. And you really don't want to pay them any more than $15 an hour. But a lot of people can find a lot of work for 15 bucks an hour. There are some programs that have come in, and folks have been looking at options for training meat cutters. Penn State has an interesting program, and it is subsidized by the state of Pennsylvania. So they bring students in to a program. You spend 4 months on campus at the State College of Pennsylvania, learning meat cutting, breaking down carcasses. You learn all of it at their butcher school. Then the state subsidizes you to be an apprentice at a state meat processing plant. You can't go outside of Pennsylvania to get this, but they will pay part of your salary if you will go work at a small meat processing plant in the state of Pennsylvania. And that's how they're billing it. That's an expensive program. And remember, when you're doing meat cutting, it's not just the cost of getting somebody in there to do the processing, it's the cost of all the animals that they're going to mess up while they're trying to learn. You know, who's willing to pay or give away that many animals, or lose that much quality of meat? So that's a big concern. University of Kentucky's butcher shop, they have a different approach. Theirs is, we'll bring you in a few times during the course of a year, and we have some different 3-day workshops where you can learn how to break down a beef carcass one day, or one weekend, long weekend, hog carcass over a 3-day span later on in the year. So you get a little hands-on experience, but it's just, you're just really peeking in the door. You're not really an expert at anything. You're just kind of getting some of the basics, and maybe if you're lucky, you get your hands dirty, literally trying to do a little meat cutting. So labor is the biggest issue of all. And I want to show this, just backing up. Like I said, OSU had looked at small plants in Oklahoma in 1983, again in 2000. In 1983, there was no problem finding labor. We had meat cutter training programs at some of our career tech facilities around the state. That was not a problem. We can find all the labor we want. If you look at their top 10 issues, labor was number 9. By 2000, it was number 1, because oil and gas prices were going up and people were leaving the meat industry in droves to go make more money in the oil and gas industry. High labor costs are still an issue. It was number 1 in 1983. It's number 3 in 2000. If it's not the availability this year, it is probably number 2 if we were to go out and redo this survey. But notice high prices for livestock and meat, that's not an issue. That's the very bottom of the top 10 issues, because you're providing a service. Cattle prices up, cattle prices down, meat prices up, meat prices down. You're still the processor in the middle. You're making your margin. So that's the thing they focus on the most for the small processors. Now we'll kind of stop it there. It kind of gives you an overview of some of the issues in meat processing today. It's not as simple as just buying a steer and taking it to the local butcher shop, because that local butcher shop's going to say, take it back home and you can feed it in your backyard for another 6 months until we can actually get it in. It's not as easy as just saying, I'm going to open a shop and run it. We have plants right now around the state that are desperately searching for anybody that has any kind of skill set to manage some of these new facilities that are being built. And nobody can find any kind of trained labor. So you're hoping you can find a way to not lose too much money or too many customers while training somebody to come in and work on your plant cutting meat. Okay, I'm gonna look at some of the questions we have here. Brett, do you want me to just take the questions as they are, or do you want to try to coordinate asking the questions and I'll try to coordinate and answer? How do you want to do it?
You can take the questions as they are. And I have unmuted or I've enabled the option so people can unmute themselves and ask it as well, or type it through the chat box.
Okay. One of the questions was when we're talking about the number of plants that exist in the state, are these the ones that are actually in business or in the finishing stages of production? That was just the ones that are actually operating under some level of inspection or are actually doing slaughter. If you're still a concrete slab with a few rafters hanging up, then you don't count. Not until you're actually licensed facility did it get included in those numbers at all. Another question. Well, that might be it. Might be the only question we had at the moment. Does anybody have any other questions?
And we do have a survey, so I shared that link in the chat box as well for people. You can click on that and fill that out and help us know how we're doing as you think about your questions. If there are no other questions, thank you, Dr. Holcomb, for presenting today, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We do not have a date set for a December webinar, so I will share that information through email and social media once we do have a date and topic finalized for the December webinar. And there is Dr. Holcomb's contact information if you do want to get a hold of him. And yes, thanks again for joining us. And if there are no other questions, I will end our webinar and see you in December.
Thank you, Brent.
You're welcome.